Section 1.4, Order of Operations. In mathematics, sometimes you'll be dealing with expressions which involves multiple operations such as addition, subtraction, exponents, radicals, and absolute value. Also grouping symbols like, say, parentheses and brackets and braces. So the question is, how do you simplify these kind of expressions in algebra classes? So basically, we have to review 4 basic operations, which are addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. We also have other operations, such as exponents. Exponents are like, let's say, you're trying to multiply, let's say, 2 by itself 4 times. So instead of writing 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, we could just write this as 2 to the 4, which is like 16. So that's basically how exponent looks like. As far as the roots, that would be like this kind of notation, which is called the radical sign. So this is called the radical. Okay, usually there is a number here. By default, if you don't see the number, that just means square root. However, if the number inside the V shape is 3, that would be called a cube root. So that's like cube root. This is like what? Square root. Okay, but what does it mean? Well, let's say you were asked to find the square root of 25. What is that equal to? Well, the square root of 25 is like, what do I multiply by itself twice to get 25? So it turns out the magic number is 5. Because if you multiply 5 by itself twice, you get 25. Incidentally, I don't know if I mentioned this, these are called index. So these are called index, and this is a radical sign. On the other hand, if the question was, what's the cube root of 8? That's just like, give me a number, which if you multiply it by itself 3 times, you get 8. Remember, it has to be the same number. So in this case, the magic number is 2. Why? Because 2 times 2 times 2, 3 times, gives you 8. So we say the cube root of 8 is 2. Square root of 25 is 5. And so on and so forth. The other operation is absolute value, which is denoted by bars and a number inside the bars. Let's say like as absolute value of, let's say, 3. That's how you read this. You read this as absolute value of, let's say, 3. The number inside the bars could be also negative, which you read it as absolute value of -3. So the question is, what exactly absolute value is and what does it represent? Well, absolute value is a measure of distance on a number line. So if this is a number line, let's say, absolute value of +3, that means on a number line, you go what? 3 units to the right side of the 0. So this much is absolute value of 3. On the other hand, absolute value of -3, that means we go what? 3 units to the left side of the 0 on a number line. So this much happens to be absolute value of -3. But in either case, because you're measuring distance, and distance cannot be negative, so absolute value of any number is always positive. In other words, absolute value of the square root of 3 is 3. 3 is 3. Absolute value of -3 is still 3. However, the difference, as I mentioned, if the number is positive, you go in that many units on the right side of the 0. And if the number inside the bars happens to be negative, you go in that many units to the left side of the 0. But in either case, we are measuring distance, and distance cannot be negative. You can't say from here to LAX is -25 miles. It has to be what? Positive 25 miles, whether you go from Long Beach City College to LAX or back to Long Beach City College from LAX. So either way, it's positive 25 miles. So what would be the order of operations? Well, I'm sure you all know order of operations are as follows. Step one is evaluate the expressions with grouping symbols. What are the grouping symbols? Parentheses, parentheses, brackets. So these are brackets, okay? And then we have something called braces. So braces. So we always start from the parentheses. We work our way to what? Brackets. And the last thing we simplify is braces. So these are known as grouping symbols, which are used in the land of mathematics to separate the what? Expressions from each other. So that's the first thing we do. We get rid of these parentheses or brackets or braces. The next step is what? Evaluate the expressions with what? Exponents and radicals and absolute values. So that's the next step. Third step is what? Do all the multiplication and divisions in order as you go from left to right side of the expression. Remember, all of these steps, we apply them as we go from left to the right side of the expression or the problem. Finally, the last thing we do when we do order of operation, as you all know, we do all the additions and subtractions as we go from left to right. So with that said, and I hope this is kind of review from Algebra 1 classes, so let's try a few problems, see if I can refresh your memory. And by the way, this dot here means multiplication. So notice we got 13 plus 4 times 2 to the power of 3 minus 17. Okay, so as we go from left to right, I see addition, multiplication, exponent, and subtraction. According to order of operation, I got to do the exponent first. So let's take care of that guy first. Keep in mind 2 to the power of 3 means you got to multiply 2 by itself 3 times, which gives you 8. So this would read 13 plus 4 times 8 minus 17. But now as I go from left to right, I see multiplication. I got to take care of that first. When I do, I get what? 13 plus what? 32 minus 17. Then I see addition. That would give us what? 45 minus 17. Is that right? And then the final answer would be like 28. You all see it. Yeah? So order of operation. As you go from left to right, follow these 4 steps and simplify what you see, the type of operations you see as you go from left to right, till you end up with a single number. Yes? Problem number 2 is what? 5 minus absolute value of negative 3 minus 6, quantity 6 minus 2 to the power of 4. According to order of operations, I got to do what's inside the parentheses first. But inside the parentheses, I have a subtraction and exponent. So I got to do the exponent first, correct? So that would be like, say, 6 minus 2 to the power of 4 is 2 times itself, what? 4 times, which is 16. Incidentally, the question is, why didn't you multiply negative 4 times by itself? Remember, there is a difference between whether what? The number is negative or you multiplying an exponent by a negative number. When the number is negative, that means the number is inside the parentheses. You take the number and multiply it by itself 4 times. So the answer is 16. However, if the number doesn't have parentheses, so this is order of operation. Believe it or not, this is like negative 1, which you don't see it, times 2 to the 4. So order of operation says you got to do this guy first, which is what? 16. but -1 times 16 is -16. Do you see the difference between raising a negative number to a what? Even power, or multiplying what? Negative sign by raising a number to even power. Notice the difference in answers, correct? Okay, we're still not done, so we got to do what's inside the parentheses. And that would give us what? -10, 6 minus 16. As I go from left to right, I see absolute value, so that would be minus absolute value of what? -3 is +3. Remember now, I cannot distribute the negative because this is not a distribution law. This is minus absolute value, but absolute value has to go before subtraction operation. So first you simplify absolute value of -3, which is 3, and then multiply the final answer by negative. And this guy is -10. So as you go from left to right, so that would be like 5 minus 3 plus 10. 5 minus 3 is 2, 2 plus 10, the final answer is 12. Do you see it? Okay. So this pretty much goes on. The next one is brackets, 16 divided by 2 times 3 minus quantity 4 minus 3 squared, quantity squared, quantity to the power of 3. First thing you do is do do the order of operations within the parentheses. So this would be 16 times divided by 2 times 3 minus 4. 3 to the power of 2 is 3 times 3, which is 9. Don't forget you got a power of 2 there, and you get a power of 3 outside of the brackets. So we still have to simplify what's inside the parentheses. So that would be like, say, what is it? -5 squared cubed. I don't need this parentheses. Sorry about that. Let me just erase it. So we're good to go. All right, so there. Okay, now as I go from left to right, I see exponent. I got to take care of that guy first. So that would be like what? Brackets, 16 divided by 2 times 3 minus exponent. Okay, keep in mind this is minus -5 squared. In other words, first you got to do the exponent, which is like what? +25, and then multiply the minus by the result. And this would be like cubed. Okay, so keep in mind, just like what we mentioned, when the number is negative and it's inside the parentheses, you also raise the negative sign to that power as well, right? So no distribution till we take care of the exponent first. Once you do the exponent, then you do the multiplication. And that's according to the order of operations. Remember, exponents comes before multiplication. Alrighty, so this would be like what? Now, as I go from left to right, I see division, multiplication, subtraction. So I gotta do division first. Be careful. So this would be like 16 divided by 2 is 8. Okay. And now I see multiplication, right? So that would be like what? 8 times 3 is 24, minus 25 cubed. But now 24 minus 25 is -1. -1 to the power of 3 is -1. So that's the final answer. Why is that? Because -1 times itself 3 times gives you -1. So if you multiply a negative odd many times by itself, you still get negative. If you multiply the negative even many times, you get what? Positive answer. Okay, so on to the next problem. So you got an absolute value, square root, exponent, division, subtraction. So let's take care of the absolute value first. which is absolute value of negative 3 is positive 3. Square root of 36. Square root of 36, that's how you read this. Square root of 36. What does that mean? That means what? Give me a number. If you multiply it by itself twice, you get 36. Turns out the answer is what? 6 divided by absolute value of 2, which is 2. And then what? 3 squared is 9. So as you go from left to right, I see multiplication. I see division here. Do you see it? And then I see addition. So let's do this guy first. That's negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. And then what? Negative 6 divided by 2 is what? Negative 3, right? And then negative 6 minus 3 is negative 9. Negative 9 plus 9, the final answer is 0. Do you all see it? So absolute values, square roots, and exponents should be taken care of first, and then you worry about the multiplication and division and addition and subtraction. So follow the order of operation, guys. Sometimes you have fractions, so the question is, should I begin from the top or bottom? Answer, it doesn't matter. Usually people start from the top, so let's do the top first. I see absolute value, I see division, and I see subtraction, so I gotta do the absolute value first. So that would be 5 minus absolute value of negative 15 is positive 15. Absolute value of 3 is 3. Let's do the bottom a little. 2 times what? 4 minus absolute value of 5 is 5, positive 5, and then 9. On top, I see subtraction, I see division. Remember, division goes before subtraction, so you gotta divide 3 into 15. So that would be 5 minus 15 divided by 3 is 5. And then here, you got to do what's inside the parentheses, which is 4 minus 5 is what? Negative 1, right? Then you do the multiplication, so that would be what? Negative 2 plus 9, and on top you have 0. So you get 0 divided by 7. So the question is, what's the answer? Is it undefined? Is it 0? Is it 7? Well, it turns out the answer is 0. Why is that? Because when you say 0 divided by 7, that's like how many times 7 divides into 0? Well, the only number I know is 0, because 0 times 7 is 0, so there it is. So the moral of the story is, if you have 0 on top of the fraction and a number at the bottom of the fraction, the answer is always, rain or shine, 0. Right? On the other hand, what if the 0 appears at the bottom of the fraction? Well, let's take care of this guy. 6 times negative 3 plus 4 times 7 minus 4 squared divided by negative 6 plus square root of 4 times 2 squared minus 1. Well, on top, I see exponents, so I got to do that guy first. So that would be like, excuse me, 6 times negative 3 plus 4 times 7 minus 4 squared, which is 16. Keep in mind, this is order of operation. This means negative 1 times 4 squared. So I got to do the exponent, which is 16. Then I got to multiply it by negative 1. You know, that invisible 1 here, you don't see. So the final answer is negative 16. Do you see it? At the bottom, I got negative 6 plus square root of 4 is 2. Oops, sorry, I was supposed to do this guy first. That's okay. So that's 2 squared 4 minus 1. Okay. So now on top, as I go from left to right, I see multiplication and multiplication, subtraction. Excuse me. So now let's take care of those guys. 6 times negative 3 is negative 18. 4 times 7 is 28 minus 16. Excuse me. At the bottom, I have negative 6 plus 2. 4 minus 1 is 3. So I get negative 6 plus 6. Remember, I'm supposed to multiply before I add. On top, I get what? Positive 10 minus 16, because that's negative 18 plus 28, right? And that would give us what? Negative 6 over 0. Is that right? So notice now I have a 0 at the bottom. So the question is, what's the answer now? Well, that just shows you when you say negative 6 divided by 0, that's like how many times 0 divides into negative 6. In other words, what do I multiply 0 by to get negative 6? The answer is undefined. We don't know what it is, so we write it as undefined. Undefined. It is not known, right? There is no answer. Is that right? So the moral of the story is when you divide a number by 0, you get undefined, right? Whereas if you divide 0 by a number, you get 0. The bottom line is if there is a 0 on top of the fraction, their answer is 0. If there is a 0 at the bottom of the fraction, the answer is undefined. Finally, sometimes they give you an expression and they give you the value of these unknowns, these letters, and they want to evaluate. Remember, the word evaluate means find the value of. In other words, we need an answer, correct? We need an answer. So it says negative 1 minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Those of you who recognize this, this is kind of like what? Quadratic formula, except it's not plus or minus. They just took the minus sign, not plus or minus. So you can have only a single answer. The idea is if a is 2, b is negative 1, c is negative 10, what would this expression be equal to? Well, the first thing I do is what? I kind of do a blank formula like so. Do you see it? Okay. All right. So instead of A and B and C, I just insert blank parentheses. Why do I do that? Because I know the values of A, B, and C. It was given to me. So now I insert those values. So B is negative 1. Okay. Here is also negative 1 because that's B squared. A is 2 and C is negative 10 and A is 2. So insert the values and then you'll be on your way to what? Evaluate this. The way we evaluate this guy goes as follows. First, you multiply negative by negative 1, so you get positive 1, correct? Then you, under the radical, what? Raise this guy to the power of 2. Remember, any number to the power, even power, is always positive. So negative 1 to the power of 2 is negative 1 times negative 1, which is still positive 1, right? So a negative number raised to the even power gives you positive. Next, you multiply these three numbers, negative 4ac, including the sign. In other words, you go negative 4 times 2 is negative what? 8. Negative 8 times negative 10 is positive 80. Next, you multiply 2 by 2, which is 4. And now the next step is add these numbers up. So here we multiply, here we what? Raise negative 1 to the power of 2. Here we multiplied, and now here we're going to add, right? So what would I get? I get 1 minus square root of 81 over 4. But now I need to know what the square root of 81 is. What is the square root of 81? That's like give me a number. When you multiply it by itself twice, you get 81. And the answer is 9. So let's just write this down. And so that would be like what? Oh, 1 minus 9 over 4. 1 minus 9 is what? Negative 8 over 4. And I believe we have what? Negative 2. Is that right? So let's just double check. Negative, negative, negative 1, negative 4ac. So that's positive, negative, and that's positive 80. So that's 81. So that's 1 minus what? Square root of 81, which is 9 over 4. And I got negative 2. Okay, so check that out and make sure I did it okay. Finally, we got what? Fractions. When it comes to fractions, we'll talk about this a little bit later in the course, but right now we have multiplication, division, and multiplication. Remember, when we multiply or divide what? Fractions, we do not need LCD, which stands for least common denominator. We do not. So what do? As I go from left to right, I see multiplication and then division. So I got to do the multiplication first. How do you multiply 1/2 by 2/3? Either you multiply the tops and the bottoms, okay, and then reduce by 2, okay, we get 1/3. Or the better way to do this is what? Cross multiply. 2 goes into 2 once, 2 goes into 2 once. So 1 over 1 times 1/3 is 1/3. So I prefer it this way as opposed to multiplying it across. So 1/2 times 2/3 is 1/3. It's divided by 3/4 minus 1/6 times negative 1/3. As I go from left to right, I see division. So how do you divide fractions? You change the division to multiplication, and then you flip this fraction, correct? That's called divisor. Divisor. So flipping 3 over 4 changes the fraction into 4 over 3. Now instead of dividing, we multiply. Minus 1 over 6 times negative 1 over 3. Once again, I see multiplication, subtraction, multiplication. So I got to do the multiplications first. Okay, how do you do this? First you multiply what? At the tops, so that's 4. The bottoms, that's 9, 3 times 3. Here you still what? Keep your minus sign. Negative times negative is positive. 1 times 1 is 1. 6 times 3 is what? 18. Now looks like we're adding fractions. Fractions with what? Unlike what? Denominators. Denominators, correct? So we need the lowest common denominator. So the question is, give me smallest number, which 9 and 18 goes into that number with no remainder. Well, turns out the answer is what? 18. So what do? You put the common denominator down, and now you go and what? Kind of force these denominators look like LCD. How do you do that? You go, 9 goes into 18 twice, so you multiply top and bottom of the first fraction by 2. 18 goes into 18 once, so you can multiply top and bottom by 1. So by doing this, now notice the denominators look alike. The minute you have like denominators, then you add the tops. So this would be like 4 times 2 plus 1 times 1. So that would be 8 plus 1 over 18, which is 9 over 18, which reduces by 9 to 1 over 2. And that pretty much covers section 1.4. Hope that refreshed your memory, and if you have any questions, by all means, let me know. Thank you.